Thank you for listening to the Council of Institutional Investors Voice of Corporate Governance. I'm Jeff Mahoney, General Counsel of CII. The purpose of these monthly episodes is to update CII members and the general public on significant developments in U.S. corporate governance and capital markets regulation and CII's related advocacy activities. This update covers the period from December 3rd, 2024 to January 7th, 2025. The following is my top 10 list of events over that period. Number 10. On December 12th, the Council of Institutional Investors sent a letter to the President of the European Commission offering CII's recommendations on key topics affecting shareholders' rights as the College of Commissioners defines its priorities for the coming years. The letter expresses concerns about and offers recommendations on the following 5 topics. Number 1, barriers to voting rights. CII is concerned about voting processes that may reduce voting power, such as burdensome power of attorney and physical attendance requirements, as well as obstacles to split voting and the need for bans on share blocking throughout the European Union. The letter quotes a fundamental CII policy that states a shareholder's right to vote is inviolate and should not be abridged. Number 2, annual meeting practices. Some EU member states are moving in the direction of fully virtual or closed-door meetings, in some cases making temporary measures adopted in response to COVID-19 permanent. CII policies recommend that companies consider that many investors have a preference for in-person meetings. They also acknowledge that firms should have the flexibility to choose in-person, hybrid, or virtual-only formats, but should use virtual technology to broaden, not limit, shareholder meeting participation. Number 3, proxy voting procedures. CII is concerned that the voting deadlines set by custodians and other intermediaries can be sometimes significantly ahead of the annual meeting date, making it harder for investors, particularly non-EU investors, to cast timely and informed votes. CII recommends that further work should be done to ensure that meeting materials, including relevant information about director candidates, are distributed early enough to allow investors to make informed decisions, including investors not based in the EU. Systematic vote counting, the publication of the vote tally, and transparency on voting outcome by agenda item are all supported by CII as well. 4, dual class stock. Overall, CII has long opposed dual class stock structures, as well as related control enhancing devices like loyalty shares and golden shares, contending that unequal voting rights misalign economic interests and corporate control, often entrenching management and other insiders. When dual-class stock is permitted, CII recommends companies implement mandatory time-based sunset clauses of 7 years or less. Cases where companies want to extend the dual-class stock structure beyond the original sunsetted term, CII encourages companies to seek shareholder approval by a majority of outstanding shares of each class voting separately on a one-share, one-vote basis, and limit any extension to 7 years or less. If neither of these approaches are possible, companies should limit both the ability to transfer such shares and the maximum voting ratio that can be applied. In addition, they should ensure that unequal voting rights cannot apply to certain material decisions and that companies disclose voting outcomes on a class-by-class basis. And number 5, collaborative engagement. To give investors reassurance that they can engage with companies on important governance matters without the risk of being perceived as acting in concert with other investors, CII suggests that the European Commission ask the European Securities and Markets Authorities to review its 2014 statement on what constitutes acting in concert and ensure that the statement has sufficient legal weight to be consistently implemented in all EU member states. Number 9, on December 10th, the Ohio House of Representatives passed Ohio Senate Bill 6. The bill stipulates that state pension funds and endowments should not make investment decisions with the primary purpose of influencing any social or environmental policy or attempting to influence the governance of a corporation. The legislation awaits the signature of Ohio Governor Mike DeWine. The bill requires the funds and endowments to make investment decisions with the sole purpose of maximizing the return on its investments, and includes language stating that the boards of these funds must make investments with the goal of maximizing returns. Those provisions would apply to the Ohio Public Employees Retirement System, the Ohio Police and Fire Pension Fund, the State Teachers Retirement System of Ohio, the School Employees Retirement System of Ohio, the Ohio Highway Patrol Retirement System, as well as numerous state, college, and university endowments. Legislation faced opposition from labor groups, including the Ohio AFL-CIO, the Ohio Federation of Teachers, and AFSCME, Ohio Counsel 8. Similar laws are currently pending in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Since 2020, 43 anti-ESG investing laws have been implemented in states across the country, and as indicated, more are expected in 2025. Number 8. On December 13th, the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission announced that the director of the Division of Corporation Finance, Eric Girding, would be departing from the commission on December 31st, and Cecily Lamoth will serve as acting director. Director Girding joined the SEC in October 2021 as a deputy director of the division, where he led legal and regulatory policy. He became the division's director in February 2023. During his tenure, the SEC implemented a number of rulemakings that the Council of Institutional Investors brought to the forefront and were the primary public supporters of, including the following 3 rulemakings. 1, universal proxies. 2, listing standards for clawbacks of erroneously awarded compensation. And 3, reforming Rule 10b-5-1 trading plans regarding when executive insiders can sell their company shares and have an affirmative defense to insider trading. Number 7. On December 12th, a coalition of more than 40 organizations, including Public Citizen, Americans for Financial Reform, and the AFL-CIO, sent a letter to U.S. senators urging them to vote to confirm Commissioner Carolyn Crenshaw for a second term at the Securities and Exchange Commission. The letter points out that the incoming Trump administration has signaled it is considering breaking from the tradition under which the other political party selects candidates for the 2 minority seats at the SEC. If it does follow that course, the 2 traditionally Democratic SEC seats could be vacant for an extended period of time. Crenshaw's term expired June 5th, 2024, but she could continue to serve another 18 months. She's not replaced before then. Commissioner Jaime Lizarraga announced he will depart from the commission on January 17th. The investor's letter cites Crenshaw's support for improved disclosures about the workforce and buybacks, shareholder rights, the right of public pension funds to place their issues before annual meetings, and better accounting for executive compensation. Crenshaw won unanimous confirmation for her first term at the SEC. Number 6. On December 17th, plans for the U.S. Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs to vote on the reconfirmation of Commissioner Carolyn Crenshaw of the Securities and Exchange Commission failed. As indicated, Commissioner Crenshaw's term expired June 5th, 2024, but she could continue to serve another 18 months if she's not replaced before then. The Senate Banking Committee scheduled a vote on the reconfirmation on December 11th, but that vote was postponed and rescheduled for December 18th. On December 17th, the committee canceled the December 18th vote after it became clear that it did not have the support it needed to move the nomination out of the committee. Bill Hagerty, in a December 17th post on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter, Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee, a member of the Banking Committee, wrote, quote, "My Republican colleagues and I blocked banking Democrats' 11th hour attempt to install an anti-crypto climate activist at the SEC," unquote. Number 5. On December 13th, a report was issued by the U.S. House Judiciary Committee accusing a climate cartel comprised of the 3 largest asset managers, blue state public pension funds, and proxy advisors, of colluding to pressure American businesses to commit to net zero and scale down disfavored production. The report is entitled Sustainability Shakedown: How a Climate Cartel of Money Managers Colluded to Take Over the Board of America's Largest Energy Company. The report says that various groups exert pressure through coalitions such as the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative, Series, and Climate Action 100 Plus, which it says push U.S. companies to disclose, reduce, and enforce net zero climate commitments. The report asserts that when companies refuse to surrender and comply, the climate cartel colludes to fire company board members and replace them with climate cartel aligned members. The committee says the report is the result of an investigation into the adequacy of U.S. antitrust laws in light of increasing commitments among left-wing environmental activists and major institutional investors to impose environmental, social, and governance goals on the U.S. economy. The publication highlights the following actions it says the climate cartel took at ExxonMobil, including the following 4 actions. 1, demanded the company make immaterial climate disclosures that obscure material information by distorting markets with speculative climate-related guesswork. 2, launched campaigns calling for emission reduction targets that require steep declines in ExxonMobil's production. 3, colluded to vote against the company's board of directors. And 4, removed and replaced 3 of ExxonMobil's board members. As part of the effort to remove ExxonMobil board members, the committee report says Climate Action 100 Plus took 5 actions. 1, partnered with the activist fund Engine Number 1 and financed the effort with $4.7 million. 2, conducted an EU roadshow and secured critical foreign support from foreign entities such as Federated Hermes, Legal & General, and Aviva investors. 3, engaged with big blue state pension funds. 4, colluded with BlackRock, State Street Global Advisors, and Vanguard to secure a critical mass of votes for Engine Number 1's candidates. And 5, collaborated with proxy advisors to gain their support for its candidates. The report notes that after the 3 new board members were elected, ExxonMobil made a series of net zero commitments for the first time. The report faults the Biden-Harris administration for not investigating the climate cartel and enforcing antitrust laws, and notes that after the committee launched its investigation, 70 investors withdrew from Climate Action 100 Plus. The report warns that the committee remains committed to continuing its investigation of the climate cartel's anti-competitive conduct to inform potential legislative reforms. Number 4, on December 19th, the Council of Institutional Investors sent a letter to the Securities and Exchange Commission generally supporting the Commission's approval of the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board's recently adopted standards on audit firm reporting. Standards would require audit firms to provide new information, including details about the firm's leadership and governance structure, as well as management of cybersecurity risks. All this new information would be useful to many investors when they are voting on auditor ratifications and in the connection with their oversight and voting on the election of audit committee chairs and members. CII backs the adopted standards because they're in line with its membership-approved policies, including the following 4 policies. 1, our policies describing audit committee responsibilities regarding independent auditors. Number 2, our policies on shareholders' votes on the board's choice of outside auditor. Number 3, our policies on auditors as financial gatekeepers and the need for more transparency, oversight, genuine accountability of audit firms. And number 4, the independence of auditing standard setters and their accountability to investors. Letter also notes that we agree that the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002 authorized the adopted standards by providing that the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board may require the auditing firms to provide information that the board shall specify as necessary or appropriate in the public interest or for the protection of investors. Number 3, in a January 2nd letter to the Securities and Exchange Commission, Council of Institutional Investors supports the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board's recently adopted standards on firm and engagement metrics and related amendments to PCAOB standards. Letter describes how the adopted standards are aligned with CII membership policies. Letter concludes that the adopted standards, albeit long overdue, are responsive to investors' information needs. CII also points out that the adopted standards are derived from a 2008 recommendation from the U.S. Department of Treasury's Advisory Committee on the Auditing Profession, whose members included then CII Executive Director Ann Yerger, who strongly supported the recommendation. CII believes the adopted standard would provide valuable information for investors when voting to ratify the external auditors and for overseeing and voting to elect audit committee chairs and members. Number 2, on December 11th, the New Orleans-based 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled in a 9-day decision that the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission did not have statutory authority to approve a NASDAQ listing standard required NASDAQ-listed companies to disclose demographic data for members of their boards. Shortly after the SEC approved the listing standards on August 6, 2021, the National Center for Public Policy Research and the Alliance for Fair Board Recruitment filed suit in the Fifth Circuit, arguing that diversity rules fall outside of the SEC's regulatory authority under the Securities Exchange Act of 1934. On February 25, 2022, the Council of Institutional Investors and 7 other groups filed a joint amicus brief in support of the SEC. On October 18, 2023, a 3-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit ruled in favor of the SEC, stating that the SEC's approval of the listing standards complied with the 34 Act and the Administrative Procedure Act. The court rejected the constitutional claims brought by plaintiffs because NASDAQ is a private entity, not a government institution or state act. Thereafter, the court granted plaintiffs a petition for rehearing en banc. On December 11, 2024, the Fifth Circuit sitting en banc held in a 9-8 ruling that the diversity rule could not be squared with the 34 Act. Judge Andrew Oldham wrote in the opinion for the majority that the listing standards are far removed from the 34 Act, which requires the SEC to approve stock exchange listing standards that promote just and equitable principles of trade. The majority of the court also rejected the SEC's argument listing standards were designed to protect investors in the public interest. Majority's opinion said board diversity disclosures did not implicate the public interest because the SEC failed to establish a link between the racial, gender, and LGBTQ identities of a company's board members and the quality of a company's financial reporting, internal controls, public disclosures, and management oversight. NASDAQ representative commented that the exchange does not plan to appeal the ruling, and an SEC spokesman said the commission is reviewing the decision and will determine next steps as appropriate. As of the date of this podcast, the SEC has not taken any public actions to challenge the Fifth Circuit's decision and are not expected to do so. And my number 1 most significant development in U.S. corporate governance and capital markets regulation for the period from December 3rd, 2024 to January 7th, 2025 occurred on December 4th, when President-elect Donald Trump nominated Paul Atkins to be the next chair of the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Mr. Atkins has had a long history at the SEC. Mr. Atkins served as an SEC commissioner for 6 years during the George W. Bush administration, and before that as a staffer for 2 former SEC chairs, Richard Breeden and Arthur Levitt. Mr. Atkins is currently the chief executive at Potomac Global Partners, a Washington-based strategic and risk management advisory business he founded in 2009. Mr. Atkins has been involved in crypto policy as co-chair of the Token Alliance, which works to develop best practices for digital asset issuances and trading platforms, and the broader Blockchain Trade Association, the Chamber of Digital Commerce, as a member of its advisory board. President-elect Trump said in a Truth Social post announcing the pick, quote, "Paul is a proven leader for common sense regulations," unquote. President-elect Trump also stated that Mr. Atkins, quote, "recognizes that digital assets and other innovations are crucial to making America greater than ever before," unquote. Mr. Atkins most recently spoke to the members of the Council of Institutional Investors as part of a Washington update session moderated by yours truly at CII's 2024 Fall Conference in Brooklyn. As SEC Commissioner, Mr. Atkins spoke to the members of CII at our 2003 Spring Conference. Commissioner Atkins' speech covered, among other topics, SEC Rule 14a8, the shareholder proposal rule. Among his remarks on Rule 14a8, Commissioner Atkins stated that he would, quote, "like to see us address whether there are means of removing or more realistically reducing the need of SEC staffers acting as referees in the shareholder proposal process, unquote. In addition, Commissioner Atkins criticized the commission for being overly reliant on the ordinary business exception in Rule 14A8I7. Commissioner Atkins stated that his, quote, misgivings regarding this exception have nothing to do with its purpose. I recognize that every corporate decision cannot realistically be taken by shareholders without paralyzing the corporation. But instead, I feel that often this exception has been relied upon long after a matter can any longer be deemed ordinary, unquote. That completes my monthly U.S. corporate governance capital markets update. If you have any questions regarding any of the issues discussed, please feel free to email me at Jeff, that's Jeff, at CII.org. Thanks again for listening to the Voice of Corporate Governance, and happy 2025.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Voice of Corporate Governance, brought to you by the Council of Institutional Investors. The Voice of Corporate Governance is a free, non-sponsored podcast that highlights critical developments in corporate governance and other important issues affecting institutional investors. The views expressed by those interviewed on the podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of CII or its members. For more information on CII and its policies on corporate governance, please visit our website at www.cii.org.